Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, December 2nd. This is Africa 54.
The United Nations Secretary General slams COVID-related travel apartheid as ineffective. Refugees in Kenya celebrate a new law allowing them to integrate into the economy and society. And South Africa's teenage pregnancy rate has spiked during the pandemic. We'll explain the impact.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said on Wednesday that travel restrictions imposed over COVID-19 that isolate any one country or region is not only deeply unfair but punitive, but also ineffective. Speaking to reporters in New York, Guterres said the only way to reduce the risk of transmission while allowing for travel and economic engagement was to repeatedly test travelers together with other appropriate and truly effective measures.
The people of Africa cannot be blamed for the immorally low level of vaccinations available to them, nor should they be collectively punished for identifying and sharing crucial science and health information with the world. With a virus that is truly borderless, travel restrictions that isolate any one country or region are not only deeply unfair and punitive, they are ineffective. I appeal to all governments to consider instead repeated testing for travelers together with other appropriate and truly effective measures, and this is the only way to reduce the risk of transmission while allowing for travel and economic engagement.
Guterres has long warned about the dangers of vaccine inequality around the world and that low immunization rates are a breeding ground for variants. The World Health Organization is deploying a surge team to South Africa's Gauteng province, epicenter of the outbreak of the new Omicron coronavirus variant, to help with surveillance and contact tracing. Making the announcement on Thursday, the WHO's Regional Emergency Director for Africa, Salam Gay, also said it was providing technical assistance to boost the production and distribution of medical oxygen in Botswana, where Omicron has also been detected. Meanwhile, a South African music festival was cancelled on Wednesday after 36 at the site tested positive for COVID-19. That, as tourism-dependent businesses lamented travel restrictions imposed over the Omicron variant. Clara Frank has more.
Cape Town's Table Bay Harbor is usually bustling with boats and tourists. But on Wednesday, it was nearly empty. Just a few locals frequenting its bars. The docking of the Europa passenger liner on Tuesday was meant to be a ribbon-cutting celebration to mark the official start of the cruise ship season, following the damage wrought by the global health crisis. But international travel curbs on southern Africa, where the new Omicron coronavirus variant was first detected, have blown expectations of a bumper tourist season out of the water.
I'm disappointed, upset.
Tour guide Christopher Sidiata says the new season was supposed to kickstart our finances.
But now that this Omicron came up, now we are going backwards again. Yeah. So we're starting all over again. We are losing out on private charters or tourists that used to come, that were supposed to come actually. We are losing out on them as well. So.
Also missing out are these music lovers. Having departed on Tuesday for the Belito Rage Music Festival on the Eastern Coast, they will now be heading home. It's one of the various festivals taking place across South Africa, aimed at high school leavers who have just taken final exams. But organizers canceled the event on Wednesday after getting positive results for COVID-19 from 36 people out of 940 tested in the first 8 hours. It's not known whether they were infected with Omicron or another variant. A fourth wave in South Africa is expected to be triggered by Omicron, with daily infections topping 10,000 by the end of the week. New cases were at 4,373 on Tuesday, up from 2,273 the day before. That rise in infections means that for students and tourism-dependent businesses alike, the party may be over before it's begun. Clara Frank, Washington.
Amid growing concerns over the new Omicron COVID-19 variant, the Biden administration is supporting efforts by the World Health Organization to establish a new international agreement on future pandemic preparedness and response, the so-called pandemic treaty. But as White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports, public health experts are pessimistic of the outcome.
At least 55 countries have implemented travel restrictions aimed at delaying the outbreak of the Omicron COVID-19 variant.
Confirmed cases as of yesterday was 205 in 18 countries, and just this morning, that's gone up to 226 in 20 countries. And I think you're going to expect to see those numbers change rapidly.
As countries scramble to ramp up vaccinations, the Biden administration is supporting efforts by the World Health Organization to establish a new international agreement on future pandemic preparedness and response, said White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki to VOA on board Air Force One Tuesday.
The United States is committed to working with member states to take forward the recent recommendations of the Working Group on Preparedness and Response. That includes developing a new WHO convention, agreement, or other international instrument, and making agreements to improve the effectiveness and agility of international health regulations.
The U.S. had initially opposed the inclusion of language that would have made the so-called pandemic treaty, proposed in March by about 24 world leaders, legally binding. The treaty is expected to be ready in May 2024.
Anything that comes out of this process is very unlikely to make any change to our current environment and the current pandemic response. We're looking at probably a 2 to 3 year process to get to a real treaty that may or may not actually then go into effect.
Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations say that a pandemic treaty should include a waiver of patents on vaccines, the so-called TRIPS waiver at the World Trade Organization.
Vaccinate the world! Free the vaccine!
After initially opposing the waiver, the U.S. announced its support of it in April, leaving the U.K., Switzerland, and the European Union as holdouts. But many are skeptical that the Biden administration is putting any real diplomatic weight on the issue.
We do observe the lacking of more proactive leadership from the U.S. Since it's changed the position.
According to research by Duke University, almost 2 years into the pandemic, the world continues to struggle to enact an effective and equitable response. Commitments and pledges remain largely unfulfilled, including the goal of achieving 40% vaccination coverage in every country by the end of 2021 and 70% coverage by mid-2022. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
Poverty, poor infrastructure, and natural weather variability are bigger contributors to Madagascar's food crisis than climate change, according to a study released on Thursday by international research collective World Weather Attribution. Southern Madagascar's worst drought in decades has devastated crops and pushed the region to the brink of famine. More than 1 million people in the African island nation require emergency food aid. The UN World Food Programme is reporting pockets of famine already appearing in the region. WFP says 500,000 children are on the verge of becoming acutely malnourished and 110,000 severely so, causing developmental delays, disease, and death. Madagascar has one of the highest poverty rates in the world, with more than 90% of the population in the affected southern Grand Sud region living below the poverty line, according to Amnesty International. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the problem, causing a devastating effect on household incomes and access to food. The United Nations appealed on Thursday for $41 billion to provide life-saving assistance next year to a record 183 million people worldwide caught up in conflict and poverty. In its annual appeal, the world body said famine remains a terrifying prospect for 45 million people living in 43 countries as extreme weather caused by climate change reduces food supplies. In Ethiopia, where a year-old conflict between government and Tigrayan forces has spread into the Amhara and Afar regions, thousands are being displaced while fighting drought and locusts push more to the brink, according to the UN. Nearly 26 million Ethiopians require aid, including more than 9 million who depend on food rations, including 5 million in Tigray amid rising malnutrition rates.
World Food Programme estimates 9 million people are in need of emergency assistance in northern Ethiopia. Northern Ethiopia, as you know, meaning Amhara, Afar and Tigray, the three regions that comprise the north of that country. Of those 9 million, about 5 million are in Tigray, which, of course, has not received the kind of level of humanitarian supplies for many, many months. We knew that there was 400,000 people at risk of famine when this assessment was arrived at in May, and we have to deduce, given the paucity of supplies going through, that figure has only increased. So I think in terms of absolute urgent, immediate need, I think Ethiopia is the most worrying.
In a report to donors, the United Nations said without sustained and immediate action, 2022 could be catastrophic. Footage broadcast on state-affiliated television in Ethiopia has shown Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed calling on Tigrayan forces to surrender and claiming that his enemies have been defeated. David Doyle has more.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has said his enemies have been defeated as he promised to recapture territory from rebellious Tigrayan forces.
Today, the enemy is on that mountain called Geshena. We are making the plans from here. We have finished the plan by which we will rout the enemy and capture that mountain tomorrow. The main thing is, the enemy is defeated. Our remaining task is to rout the enemy and destroy them.
The Nobel Peace Prize laureate was addressing troops on the front line of the Ethiopian conflict, near Geshena in Amhara, according to state-affiliated Fana Broadcasting on Tuesday. The location could not be independently verified. Last week, Abiy said he was heading to the front line to supervise operations.
Tigrayan youths are falling like leaves. They should know that they have been defeated and surrender. Starting from today, to the defense forces, the special forces, the militia and the people, with the understanding that they are participating in something that doesn't have a clear vision or plan, and a blind and confused journey that doesn't have a destination and cannot gain a victory.
The federal military has been battling forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front for over a year.
99% target መተናል.
Last November, Abiy claimed victory over the TPLF, but having been initially beaten back, the Tigrayan forces recaptured most of Tigray, pushed into two neighboring regions and made threats that they would march on the capital. TPLF spokesperson Getachew could not be reached for comment, but on Monday he accused Abiy of engaging in farcical war games.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. In Kenya, refugees and their supporters have welcomed a new law that gives the country's 500,000 refugees better access to education and work. But the law comes as Kenya plans by July to close two of the region's largest refugee camps that are home to more than 400,000 people who fled conflict in Somalia and South Sudan. Brenda Mulinya reports from Nairobi.
Willie Rwari, a refugee from Burundi, has been in Kenya for the last 7 years without a regular source of income. He holds a diploma in mechanical training from Burundi and an additional one from Kenya. Yet, he has been unable to find steady employment in the country's capital, Nairobi.
We take up whichever jobs we get, even construction site jobs, because we don't have the required papers to get jobs we are qualified for. We can't get the Certificate of Good Conduct papers, the National Hospital Insurance, the Kenya Revenue Authority PINs, the National Social Security Fund papers. And to get any job here, you must have that. We can't even get business permits using our refugee IDs.
Rwari's hopes of getting a decent job now lies with the speedy implementation of the new Refugees Act that Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta recently signed into law. The law paves the way for refugees to integrate into the Kenyan economy and social life. Victor Odero of the International Rescue Committee says the new law is a bright spot in the quest for empowering refugees.
There was no obligation, certainly in law, for the state to facilitate the issuance of legal documentation through which then refugees would be able to get economic and social development, basically to become self-reliant.
That ability for refugees to participate in the local life has also been welcomed by the United Nations, which says it will make the refugees feel valued and dignified in their new homes.
Integration for refugees is critical. One, because refugees don't want to be the other, and they want to continue their life while seeking asylum in host country until they can return to their country safely.
The new law comes ahead of the planned closure next year of Kenya's two largest refugee camps, which together house more than 400,000 people, most of them from Somalia or South Sudan. Odero says the law will help make the process of clearing the camps easier.
For those who know the context, the refugee camps are simply unsustainable. I think this is something that people agree on across the board. So the question has been, where or can we have a legal framework that gives sufficient anchorage to durable solutions? And what we can see from this legislation is that it moves things forward. It is actually progressive.
The close to 500,000 refugees in Kenya, just like Rwari, want the laws to take effect soon so that they can get the chance to earn a decent living outside of the camps. Brenda Molinya for VOA News, Nairobi.
Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Burkina Faso's share of the global scourge of illegal child labor. We'll be right back.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Welcome back to Africa 54. South Africa's teenage pregnancy rate jumped 60% during the COVID-19 pandemic, an increase affecting the education of many young women and their hopes to escape the poverty cycle. Even though South Africa has introduced sex education in schools, parents have resisted, as Franco Puglisi reports from Johannesburg.
When schoolgirls in South Africa become pregnant, only 1/3 return to class. It is a major factor contributing to socio-economic disadvantage among youth. Serena, who does not want her real name to be used, was 15 years old when she gave birth to a baby girl.
I didn't know what to do. I was confused, I was scared, I was devastated. Sometimes I can't balance my life, my education, and the baby. But due to the support of my parents, I can do that.
Serena's experience as a teen mother was made more difficult by her parents' initial rejection and also being ostracized by the local community.
I was very upset and too emotional. But all in all, Serena, this is not the end of the world. The main purpose is that you must supposed to go to school. Attend school regularly, respect your teachers as you respect your parents at home.
The education system should put a priority on sex education, says Eddie Kekana, a primary school principal in Johannesburg.
My school is situated in an informal settlement where there are serious socio-economic factors leading to the high rate of teenage pregnancy. COVID-19 also exacerbated the situation. We should actually start collaborating and then take responsibility, educating our young people about this particular kind of a problem.
But implementing sex education programs was abandoned in the face of resistance by many parents, says the head of a South African teachers union.
When it was supposed to be introduced as sexuality education, the community started making a lot of arguments against and arguments for, so it had to be stopped, and therefore the training did not take place. The communities were not happy with that, and we are seeing the consequences of not having sexuality education is the high rate of teenage pregnancy.
While communities and parents oppose introducing sex education in schools, some parents, like Serena's mother, supported the programs.
It depends of what kind of parents we are, but naturally I must be free with my daughters to speak about sex. They must know all things about sex. Even at school, no problem. We don't have any problem about that.
The controversy over sex education continues, but has gained new urgency with the latest increase in teen pregnancy. Franco Puglisi for VOA News, Johannesburg.
An estimated 16.6 million children in sub-Saharan Africa alone are forced into illegal labor, according to the United Nations. Despite being outlawed, advocates say child labor is on the rise. Globally, 1 in 10 children are now believed to be involved in some form of child labor. From southern Burkina Faso, Henry Wilkins looks at why child labor is such a persistent problem.
It's cotton harvest season in Burkina Faso. In this village in the country's south, everyone in the community turns out to bring in the white gold, as it's sometimes called. Men, women and children. Wendkuni and Wenjam, whose names have been changed to protect their identities, are 10 and 12. They fit school around their cotton harvesting duties.
I am 10 years old. When I get up in the morning, I go to school. When I come back, I go to the field to go to work. At school, we have a lot of work lessons. My favorite subjects are geography and science.
A report by UNICEF says that a 20-year downward trend in child labour globally has come to an end in recent years, and numbers are going up again. Experts say data was collected pre-COVID-19, and they predict that the pandemic might exacerbate the situation.
If I come to the field, I work. I work to remove the cotton. When I come here, I come with my father. I hope to own my own field when I'm older.
Wendkuni and Wenjam's parents cannot harvest all the cotton they grow themselves. And they say if the family is going to make enough money to eat, the children have to help. Child labour in Burkina Faso is illegal, but the law is difficult to enforce, and families that live in poverty do not have the resources to harvest cotton without the help of the children.
Many countries, although they've adopted good policies and laws, the ILO Convention on Worst Forms of Child Labor is universally ratified. They're facing headwinds in terms of lack of economic growth, inequality, persistent inequality, and continued, pervasive poverty.
Experts say cotton produced with child labour makes it into the international supply chain easily and can be found at all levels of the fashion industry. However, advocates say while this is difficult to stop, it is possible. Arisa, a human rights non-profit advocating for global rights, says brands need to ask questions about the origins of the cotton.
One thing is for brands definitely is transparency and knowing where their cotton comes from. because if you don't know, if you have no clue where your quota comes from, you also have no clue, whether there's child labor or not, and you can't research that.
Zwart says it's also important for consumers to ask questions. Wend Cooney, meanwhile, says he wants to focus on his education. He says he loves school, and when he grows up, he hopes to be a teacher. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Southern Burkina Faso.
A Kenyan video game company has launched a football game that encourages young men to be active during the pandemic and helps stop gender-based violence. Surveys show about 40% of Kenyan women will face gender-based violence. Lenny Ruvaga reports from Nairobi.
Gamer Jamila Odhiambo introduces the junior football team at Mathare Youth Sports Association to a new kind of football game with a special purpose. Futa, Swahili slang for football, takes gamers from the metaverse into the real world, where they earn points by exercising and learning about gender-based violence.
It's really interesting because when you're playing the game, even the men can learn how to handle the women. They can learn how to go through challenges that affect us as girls and as women, and yeah, we're good to go. Everybody's okay.
Usiku Games CEO Jay Shapiro says Kenyan coders partnered with GIZ Regional Project Sport to develop Futa exclusively for Africa and for free. Players score points by wearing Google Feet to monitor their exercise and answering questions on issues related to gender-based violence.
So we're trying to combine the fact that the youth love football and love games, and taking those two and putting them together to try and teach some social values around good sportsmanship, fairness, and trying to reduce gender-based violence.
Rights group Equality Now says about 40% of women in Kenya in their lifetimes will face sexual and gender-based violence. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission's Irene Soila says it's a problem that everyone needs to address.
We need to create champions of SGBV. And that is from both genders, both men and women. We also need to create opportunities for people, because poverty is really one of the escalators of SGBV. So let's create opportunities. The other thing is also creating awareness around SGBV. People do not know that it is a major problem.
Gamer Odhiambo hopes Futa will educate Kenyan youth on gender-based violence and keep both their minds and bodies healthy. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, D.C., we thank you for watching.